Mr. President, as early as today, we expect to take up a budget resolution that will lay the groundwork for delivering on the Republican agenda. This resolution is the first step toward a final bill to make permanent the tax relief we implemented in 2017 and deliver a transformational investment in our border, national and energy security, all accompanied by substantial savings measures and common sense reforms to our government. And at the prospect of this, Mr. President, Democrats are losing their minds. Their opposition to the 2017 tax relief, of course, is well known. Since the day the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was passed and before, Democrats have attempted to mischaracterize, and some would say flat out lie, about this legislation. In fact,
guys, things are getting heated in the Senate. Senator John Thune just went off about Trump's 2017 tax cuts, calling out Democrats for losing their minds over making them permanent. He says working families got the biggest benefits, not billionaires. But is that really true? And what happens if these tax cuts expire? Let's dive into this political showdown. All right, here's the deal. Back in 2017,
Post fact checker has repeatedly issued 3 and 4 Pinocchio responses to Democrats' claims, which center around the falsehood that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was about handouts to corporations and billionaires. The truth, of course, Mr. President, is not only did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cut taxes for every income group, but it was working families, not the wealthy, who received the greatest proportional benefit. Let me just repeat that. The truth is that not only did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act cut tax rates for every income group, but it was working families and not the wealthy who received the greatest proportional benefit. Those, Mr. President, are the facts. But of course, the facts have not gotten in the way of Democrats continuing to claim that extending this tax relief is about handouts to billionaires. Democrats' latest hysteria is centered around the application of budget rules we'll use for this week's budget resolution. They claim that using a current policy baseline is somehow destroying Senate rules, even though the 1974 Congressional Budget Act, which governs this budget resolution, clearly states that it is the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee who determines the budget baseline used for budget resolutions.
Back in 2017, Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which lowered taxes across the board. Republicans say this helped working families, small businesses, and the economy. Now, Thune is leading the charge to make those cuts permanent. But Democrats are fighting back hard, calling it a gift to the rich. So, who's actually right here? Let's talk numbers. According to Thune, working families got the biggest proportional tax break, not the wealthy. He says failing to extend these cuts would mean a $2.6 trillion tax hike for those making under $400K. And if you're a small business owner, you could see taxes jump by $600 billion. But here's where it gets tricky.
So, Mr. President, using the current policy baseline is not some bizarre new gimmick. I should also note, of course, that the Senate parliamentarian has deemed the Senate budget resolution, which uses the budget policy baseline, in order and ready for floor consideration. Democrats' sudden concern for saving money and protecting the character of the Senate is touching. Who would have guessed that the party that was so eager to tear down a fundamental Senate institution mere months ago by killing the Senate filibuster would suddenly develop such a passionate interest in defending the character of the Senate? But their hysteria is misplaced. Now, Mr. President, I do understand that Democrats are uncomfortable with the idea of tax relief. When you think that government knows best, and when your enthusiasm for new government programs is virtually unlimited, it's no surprise you'd prefer to maximize the flow of taxpayer dollars to the government. But Republicans believe fundamentally that Americans know best what to do with their money. And so no matter how many times Democrats attempt to distort or outright lie about what we're trying to do here, Republicans intend to deliver a permanent extension of the tax relief that we passed in 2017. Failing to extend this tax relief would result in a $2.6 trillion tax increase on those making less than $400,000 a year, as well as a $600 billion tax increase on small businesses.
But here's where it gets tricky. Critics argue that corporations and top earners got the biggest dollar amount in cuts. So does this really help middle-class America? Thune isn't just defending Trump's tax plan, he's also going after Democrats for what he calls hypocrisy. He points out that they used similar budget tactics in the past, but now claim it's against the rules. And remember when they wanted to kill the filibuster? He's basically saying, now you care about Senate traditions? So what happens if these tax cuts expire? Well, if you make...
Senior senator from Vermont, who caucuses with the Democrats, confirmed that it's the chairman's role in a 2022 report when he was chairman of the Senate Budget Committee. And of course, Democrats themselves have previously advocated for the use of a current policy baseline. They basically invented it back in 1977, shortly after the Budget Act was enacted. Chairman Muskie, a Democrat from Maine and chairman of the Budget Committee, used a current policy baseline in his budget resolution because he thought it represented a more realistic benchmark. More recently, President Obama's fiscal year 2013 budget assumed $4.5 trillion of expiring tax cuts would be extended in the Democrats' baseline, matching current policy at the time. Jump forward to the Biden administration's most recent budget, in which Democrats explained that, and I quote, adjustments to the baseline are needed to better represent the deficit outlook under current policy and to serve as a more appropriate benchmark against which to measure policy changes.
Well, if you make $80,000 a year, you could be sending an extra $1,700 to Uncle Sam. Thune argues that keeping these cuts will create 1.2 million new jobs annually and grow the economy by 1.1%. But others say it could balloon the national debt. So is this a win for taxpayers or a long-term risk? I want to hear from you. Should these tax cuts stay or should they go?
Small businesses.
Drop your...
A typical family of four making $80,000 a year would end up sending an additional $1,700 to the government next year. $1,700. I'm quite sure they have better uses for that money than sending it to Uncle Sam. I said make this tax relief permanent, Mr. President, and I do mean permanent. Senate Republicans are united with the President in viewing a temporary extension as unacceptable. Americans should not have to live in fear of a tax hike every few years, and small businesses, including family farms and ranches like those in my home state of South Dakota, need certainty about the tax outlook so they can plan for the future. Making the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act permanent will ensure that Americans' take-home pay does not go down, and it will have significant economic benefits. The National Federation of Independent Business reports that making the Small Business Section 199A deduction permanent would result in the creation of an additional 1.2 million jobs annually, with that number climbing as the law goes on. And the Tax Foundation reports that long-run gross domestic product would increase by a substantial 1.1%. That means more jobs and more opportunities for American workers. And interestingly enough, increasing federal revenues to the tune of about $3 trillion, which is the right way, Mr. President, by growing the economy. When the economy is growing and expanding, people are working, they're making money, they're taking realizations, they're paying taxes, and you know what? Government revenue goes up, not down, which is exactly what we experienced when we passed the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act 8 years ago now. Mr. President, as I said earlier, it was working families, not the wealthy, who received the greatest proportional benefit from that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. And it is working families, not the wealthy, who will see the greatest proportional benefit from making this tax relief permanent. We are here to make sure that hardworking Americans have more breathing room, to make sure that our economy is providing them with jobs and opportunities, that they are not facing lower paychecks next year. Mr. President, I was proud to help draft the 2017 tax relief and put more money in American families' pockets. And I look forward to permanently extending it in the near future.
Drop your take in the comments. If you love breaking down politics with facts, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss a thing. We break down the biggest stories without the fluff, so let's keep this conversation going. So here's the takeaway. Thune wants Trump's tax cuts to stay, Democrats are fighting back, and your taxes could be on the line. Is this good policy or just political theater? Let's keep the debate going in the comments.